Yes, hello. My name is Wallace Gator Bradley, and I'm the host of the Bradley Report. I'm also the president and urban translator of United in Peace, Inc. We got a very interesting show today, and it's dealing with, can I say, I'm going to just say it. We need to put an end to individuals trying to get rid of one's culture, canceling one's culture, the banning of books that's dealing with racism, be it the Holocaust, be it slavery, and then people's opinion. It's almost like they trying to justify the eradication, or, for lack of a better phrase, trying to keep white superiority as the ruler of all things. And I'm basing that off a conversation and what I've been reading in the paper, and we're going to talk about that. The Israeli situation with African Americans and Jews and African Americans, Whoopi Goldberg's, I'm so glad she's back on the air. We're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about Jesse Jackson Jr.'s book, The Finger of God. And he gave a wonderful tribute. He gave a wonderful tribute on his show. He gave a wonderful tribute at the DuSable Museum in honor of Prince Asiel. And it was a tribute that was put together by the Israeli Council General for the Midwest and Shiloh Institute. Very moving. We're going to talk about that. We're going to show you. You're going to look, listen, and learn. And I want to also let it be known that the topics of this show and the issues that I'm sharing with you, my viewing audience, was put together by none other than the chairman of United in Peace, Inc., my wife, who's the producer of this show, Terry Marsh Bradley. So without further ado, let me say to God be the glory, and I want to also thank my friend, Brother Omari, for helping me with the technical things that he do to make this show possible. Brother Omari, let's start with this first story here. Rooting out Glenn Youngkin's hypocrisy. As you know, Mr. Governor Youngkin grew up in a culture marinated in Confederate grievance. He campaigned as a moderate interested in parents' rights. He has chosen to govern as a bully. His big brother style attack upon the intellectual freedom of beleaguered public school teachers has taken it several steps too far to the right. Some people say the things that he, right here, thanks, Brother Murray. Some people are saying the things that he's doing remind them of what Hitler has done or did to the Jews during the Holocaust. it says, the writer says, I'm so old I can remember when people calling themselves conservative thought cancel culture was a bad thing. More recently, the brand new governor of Virginia, Republican governor, that's why it's important that we do not elect a Republican governor or a Secretary of State for Illinois. Very important. Re-elect Governor J.B. Pritzker. And I'm of the opinion that you need to elect Alexi Janulius for the Secretary of State. We can't allow to have a Republican governor and a Secretary of State because we're seeing what's happening across the country. With them pushing a Trumptonian type of politics and governance across the country. We're seeing how the Republican governors and the Republican state legislative bodies and those that's running for Secretary of State want to make it hard for individuals to have the right to vote or trying to suppress their voting rights, okay? But that's another story for another time. Brother Omari, could you bring up the piece on Whoopi Goldberg? I want to say hooray, hooray, Whoopi Goldberg is back on the air. The View welcome back Whoopi Goldberg. I want you to see this. Could you hit that arrow right there? Right there. Thank you, sir. We'll get back to that as soon as if he's able to get it. Okay. See, that's why he do what he do. Whoopi Goldberg was suspended for, in my opinion, explaining what she felt about the evils of the Holocaust, where she had made a statement, and I'm paraphrasing, that it was man's inhumanity to man more so than a race issue. And everyone was like she was trying to say that the Holocaust didn't exist. She didn't say that. Okay? She just voiced her opinion. Let's see, we can't get it, huh? Okay. Well, let me do what I do. Let me see if I can pull that up right here. Well, anyway, I'm going to say this. Whoopi Goldberg had made a statement. Thank you. That's the next story we're going to. Whoopi Goldberg had made a statement that on her show, The View. And everybody know that The View was created for a diverse body of women, Republican, Democrat, conservative, left, right, to voice their view on certain issues because they believe opinions, in my opinion, was meant to be tolerated and respected, and they brought about good dialogue in the form of conversation. Well, it started off with them banning this book that was talking about racism and I believe the Holocaust, okay? And it was in the school. And like I just showed you earlier, you got ultra-right group of people, elected officials, that's trying to whitewash history. trying to say pretty much that slavery didn't exist because it showed that it was white people that had enslaved African Americans. Trying to say that the Holocaust really didn't exist because it was a Nazi ultra-right group of people that felt like they were superior, white race against the Jews that was over in Europe and in Germany, pretty much. Okay, I know Germany may be a part of Europe, but you know what I'm saying. Okay, there's been a push where they've tried to erase history to say that these things are happening, and you've been seeing in the media how the various temples are being defaced with the swastika and all that. Okay. Whoopi explained that she didn't see it as a race issue because we have been taught to deal with race as the color of one's skin. Okay? But it was a push that said she ought to be suspended from ABC for saying that as if she said something anti-Semitic when she didn't. And when a guy from the ADL came on to a news show and says he was against the cancel culture piece when it come to them punishing Whoopi Goldberg for what she said, and he explained that the reason that it was a race issue to them is because the Nazis have said that they were a superior race of white people against Jews being the inferior race of white people. Okay? I'm an urban translator, and some people say tomatoes and tomatoes. All right. We're going to get past that. We're going to move past that. I'm glad that she's back. Thank you, Whoopi, because you educated your fan base, including me. I want to thank you. Everybody want to thank you. And we want to thank God that those 14 days of social quarantine is over. This next story, I want you to look, listen, and learn from this young man, Jesse Jackson Jr. I understand where he's coming from about his transformation because I was transformed with the help of his father, Jesse Jackson Jr., former state's attorneys Cecil Partee, former Cook County Commissioner Jerry Butler, and my spiritual leader, Prince Asiel Ben Israel, and the African American Hebrew Israelite community when he allowed me to come to Israel. Brother Omari, could you hit this right here? There you go.
Let me first begin by giving honor and praise to God for the great privilege of being here at the DuSable Museum, of being able to share with Prince Asiel Ben Israel, whom I've known for more than half of my life.
Right.
Whose tremendous example, whose sense of global responsibility, whose sense of international connectedness for African Americans, a disconnected people. For those of us who knew not from our formal educations what it meant to be citizens of the world. Our first experiences and expectations that we were bigger than the South Side, that we were bigger than the West Side, came from none other than Prince Asiel Ben Israel. Honored to honor you on this occasion. To the Shiloh Institute, the Consulate General of Israel to the Midwest, to Congressman Danny Davis, Senator Donnie Trotter, Dr. Carol Adams, Professor Rosenstock, I'm honored to be here to celebrate the alliance between African Americans, the Jewish people, and Israel. When Christina King asked me to deliver remarks this evening for roughly 10 to 15 minutes, I had no idea that I would be following the voice of God. Congressman Davis speaks on the floor of the Congress. Everyone knows with that resonating voice that he should probably be a member of the Temptations. But we are blessed to have him as our own here in the city of Chicago. Please give Congressman Davis a great round of applause. I've been asked this evening to give some remarks on the image of God. In the Latin, as Dr. Sampson said, the Imago Dei. In celebrating the alliance between African Americans and the Jewish people, a program titled In the Image of God is rich with historical significance. Significant at the point of intersection, the definition being the point at which two things intersect. And also significant at the point of intersectionality, the definition being the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, gender, as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or advantage, or creating different modes of discrimination and privilege. In the image of God, we find a point of intersection in our mutual belief in the God of Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, David, Moses, and Jesus. In the image of God, we find a point of intersection in our mutual belief in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. In the image of God, we find a point of intersection in the slave experience. Let my people go. And the wilderness experience. In the image of God, we find a perfect intersection between Goshen and the ghetto. However, in the image of God, we find a differentiating point in the promised land experience. We have a different and differentiated promised land experience. In the promised land, the Jewish people are in the majority, and they fight any and all efforts, as they should, to subjugate them, the majority view. In our promised land experience, school districts are banning books, revising history, writing a narrative that excludes our contribution, the perspective from the minority, and a dissenting point of view. In the image of God, we find a differentiating point of view in the Pharaonic slave experience, as different than the race-based, constitutionally sanctioned slave experience. Slavery is a different experience when it is sanctioned by the people and by the Constitution. People who legally immigrate or who migrate into our constitutional republic experience always want to know, depending upon where they're immigrating or migrating from, what are black folks always complaining about? They subsequently call us lazy. They question our work ethic. They question our patriotism. They question our commitment, and worse. They inherit rights that others have fought and died for over centuries. And they are the Johnny-come-lately to the American human rights experience, taking advantage of fruit in the present from a past sown with struggle and trial and tribulation. Recently, I saw an Afghan refugee on the news wearing a MAGA hat talking about making America great again. I said to myself, damn. It is a differentiating point when ending slavery and racism and its lasting effect of white supremacy in the life, liberty, and happiness system is defined at the hands of governors and legislatures, presidents and congresses, federal and state courts. To end slavery in the constitutional context required a civil war where the American people lost family members on both sides of the legal arguments. Moral arguments and the hand of God were evident in the experience of the Jewish people and evident in our experience, but we had to change the Constitution and the law. New interpretations from the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the 1896 decisions in Plessy versus Ferguson, to the Brown versus the Board of Education decision in 1954 to the present, and a constant vigilance against new and evolving methods and modes of discrimination. From Jim Crow to Jim Crow Esquire. Our crossover and our Passover is similar, but they are different. We have just about everything in common, but we have no promised land unless we make it right here in our own Egypt land. It was Langston Hughes who said, "America never was America to me, but this I swear, America will be." America is the promised land. This is our point of intersectionality. This is also our differentiating point. God would have it that we don't get to leave Egypt. God would have it, I believe, that we transform Egypt. I mean America. The image of God. What does it mean to see God in man? John struggled with this in 1 John 4:12. If a man says, "I love God," and hateth his brother, he is a liar. For he that loveth not his brother whom he hath seen, how can he love God whom he hath not seen? God is not flesh. God is not regional. God is spirit. And to say that one loves God and hates his brother is to not see the Spirit of God or the Spirit of the divine in one's neighbor, and that is the very definition of a liar. He or she is speaking in an untruth. So how do we bring greater clarity to the spirit energy? How do we see the spirit energy? For millennia, there was a quarry in Carrara, a town in the Apuan Alps of northern Tuscany, where there existed a block of marble. Marble, as a substance, can be dated back to the beginning of the solar system. But for millennia in Carrara, Tuscany, tens of thousands of people, maybe even measured in the millions over history, walked past this block of marble and only one saw stone. But it was when Michelangelo saw the stone. He said, "I had a vision of David, and I carved away everything that was not David until I set him free." He said, "I have a vision of the angel, and I worked to set him free. I saw the angel in the marble, and I carved until I set him free. I created a vision of David in my mind, and I simply carved away everything that was not David. In every block of marble, I see a statue as plain as though it stood in front of me in perfect attitude and action. I only had to hew away the rough walls that imprisoned the lovely apparition to reveal it to the other eyes as mine saw it," Michelangelo said. In prison, Prince, I began to learn the process of seeing God in other men. And the only way I could do so was to carve away everything in myself and every man that I saw, everything within them that was not God. That's what I learned in prison. When I see my brother and sister, I try to carve away everything that is not divine until in my mind I set the divine in him free. If you see respiration in a person, and inspiration and aspiration and perspiration and expiration. These 5 words are essential to every life. If there is life, there is respiration. It is breathing. If there is life, something has inspired it. It's called inspiration. If there is something that is motivating, it is called aspiration. If there is life, it is working. That is called perspiration. And when there is no life, it's called expiration. But in the middle of all of these words is the Latin word spira. It is taken from spiritus in the Latin, or soul, spirit. Expiration is the absence of spirit. I carved away everything: attitude, behavior, lack of humility, arrogance, pretentiousness, wealth, color, to find soul and spirit. Then and only then, brothers and sisters, can we see the light within each other. When I entered into solitary confinement, I was in a terrible headspace. Naked before the world, humiliated, embarrassed, and filled with tremendous shame. I had no one to blame but myself. I knew in that moment I walked into Congress that I would be the target of both Democrats and Republicans, so I tried to conduct myself in public life as best I possibly could. But I had a secret that I had to keep from everyone. I couldn't afford to be in Congress. 2 cities, a young marriage, a young age with no money, a desire to build a family while answering the call of public service. I lived in my campaign funds. While in prison, I went a month or so barely speaking to anyone because I was there in much mental and physical pain. My cellmate at midnight, who was in the top bunk, leaned over to me and he said, "You've fallen farther than anyone here." But the Spirit had told him that I should record your journey as an artist. I responded, "I belong here. I've done something wrong in my life, and maybe I'm not only being punished for the things that I've got caught doing, but I'm being punished for the things that they did not catch me doing." Over the course of my journey, I met other men in deep shame, blame, and guilt, to the point that it was a debilitating mental condition. While in prison, I encouraged them, indeed I taught them to learn to forgive themselves. Dr. Sampson. But beyond forgiveness, we would have to work together on societal forgiveness. So I requested of the warden and the executive director of the camp the ability to help men who could not read or write fill out pardon applications and submit them to the Obama administration for possible consideration. I was convinced there was no truth in shame, there was no truth in blame, and there was no truth only to be found in guilt. That is, we had to own our behavior. And after paying their debt to society, the society that we want to build here in America, from the lineage of Abraham, from the Jewish tradition and the Islamic tradition and the Christian tradition, is a society that forgives people. That allows us to have heaven on earth here in America. The highest possibility of our own faith, not somewhere in another solar system, but right here on earth, as it is in heaven. For me, a great child of privilege, I had been given a new mission in life. There in solitary confinement, the Spirit descended upon me. And he shall. And he shall. And he shall grant reprieves and pardons. Who in the hell begins a sentence with the word "and"? No one begins a sentence with the word "and." In the Constitution of the United States, before the word "and" is commander of the army. He shall be commander-in-chief of the army and the navy and the Marines and the militia, and he shall grant reprieves and pardons. Before the Bill of Rights, James Madison says in Federalist number 74, the father of the Constitution and the author of the Bill of Rights, It is impossible for a man of pious reflection not to perceive in the Constitution the finger of the almighty hand that's signally responsible for the rebellion. In Federalist number 74, before the Bill of Rights, it's James Alexander Hamilton who says, "For my part, I sincerely esteem the Constitution, a system without which the finger could never have been devised upon by such a diversity of interests. I have found the finger of God. From the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, and Jesus. David and Jesus. David and Jesus comes commander of the army, David, and the repriever partner, Jesus of Nazareth. The function of the lineage of David. That's who we're supposed to be voting for every 4 years. Not a Democrat, not a Republican, not someone from 1793, the party of 1793, the Democratic Republican Party, or the Republican Party of 1854. But the republic that was established in 1787 based upon the highest traditions of the Judeo-Christian faith. A faith that initially African Americans were not welcomed into. But through their native experience here in the United States, had traveled over a way that with tears had been watered, and constructed a new active faith in the United States of America. And so I figured it out. I had found God's finger in the Constitution. It had transformed my experience and my testimony at that moment, Prince Asael. Prison was the best thing that ever happened to me, and maybe even the best thing that ever happened to our country. There's 68 million men and women in this country who paid their debt to society, and yet after they paid their debt, they did what the judge said do, and they did what the jury said do. They still find themselves isolated and set aside in our system. Blacks and Jews, we can do better than that. The judge gave me a 30-month sentence, but I would spend the next 7 years carving away everything in the stone in order to set the angel free. I had to carve away white male landowners, and carve away the 3/5 clause, and carve away discrimination against voting with women, and carve away the Bill of Rights, and carve away the Democratic Party, and carve away the party of Jefferson and Jackson, and carve away the party of 1854 of Abraham Lincoln. I had to carve away the party of Donald Trump. I had to carve away big versus small states, and carve away slavery and sexism and racism and anti-Semitism and white supremacy and misogyny and revisionist history and ignorance and anti-intellectualism. I had to carve away the Congress of the United States, the Senate of the United States, the courts, and all that was left in the Constitution was the cornerstone, the finger of God. I carved away everything that was not God, and I found the cornerstone of the Constitution upon which the foundation was set. I conclude, we must therefore fight as Rabbi Abraham Heschel and Martin Luther King Jr. did against the Nazi flag. We must fight as Rabbi Abraham Heschel and Martin Luther King Jr. did against the Confederate flag. Wherever the banners are raised, we must remember the Holocaust, and we must remember the hell of a cost that all of us have paid to build a more perfect union. I pray, along with 68 million debt-paid felons, that history remember us, not for the errors of our ways, Prince Asael, but as the Renaissance sculptors of a new interpretation of the Constitution and an even greater society. Thank you for having me.
Brought full circle. to the pain of the black man that needed to be chiseled out of that marble. Like the stone that the builder rejected and said that we now will become the chief cornerstone to bring peace and justice to the world. And so, Congressman, I'm proud to be your brother, your friend, your mother, your father have set a scale, a bar that's difficult to master in Chicago. Under much abuse and much scrutiny, you were destined to success and failure so that you could come as the new Jesse Jackson. So you're going to be Jesse Senior to your children. And they're ready for their father to be born again. And you did that. Tonight you planted that seed for their future. Not of shame, but of fame. Because God is getting ready to work with you that only God could do. What better place to do it except with the Consul General of Israel, the land of the righteous, to be set in a stage to prepare for the future. I'm asking you to join me, along with Congressman Davis, to begin to make the politics of America see Israel in a different light. They are not racist. We're not saying that there are people that are ignorant of who we were and are. But the bar is being set. The Consul General has lifted it up. So that if you are a good hurdler, you'll be able to overcome the racism of this world. Because Israel has set the bar. Because they came out of Europe and brought all the people of that land into a coalition that you heard him talk about. And he received me in that coalition of people in that land. I had my children of Chicago to the Mount of Transfiguration. I took them to the Mount of the Beatitudes and said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Wallace Gator Bradley, who's in this audience tonight, is a man that you can trust to protect Chicago. He got the governor elected. He got judges elected, not as a former gang member, but as a transformed man when he went to Israel and got remarried there with his wife. And named one of his sons Leviticus. So I want you to know it's real. Dr. Carol Adams.
You know, I want to end this show on this. I know where Jesse Jr. is coming from. I know where Prince has been. We all have been ex-felons. I understand when Jesse Jr. is speaking about the pardon because I was blessed to have received a pardon from a former governor, Jim Thompson, in Illinois. So I'm just saying, we got to believe in fairness and redemption in the name of humanity. And with that, I want to say, to God be the glory. That's my story. Stay prayerful, stay masked up, get your shots. Peace.